Hello everyone. Myself Dr. Jigar Panchal, Associate Professor Cardiac Anesthesia, UN Mehta Institute of Cardiology Research Center. As a part of continuous cardiac education, my talk will be on low cardiac output syndrome and management in pediatric patient post cardiac surgery. What are the learning objectives of today's talk? After the talk, we should define cardiac output and factors of determining cardiac output, define low cardiac output syndrome, evaluate the pathophysiology and etiology, how to assess and diagnose low cardiac output syndrome, evaluate the different treatment modalities that are available for the treatment. Definitions. Cardiac output is the volume of the blood that is ejected by the heart to the systemic circulation per minute. Cardiac output is equal to stroke volume multiplied by heart rate. Stroke volume is defined as the volume of the blood ejected from the left ventricle during each systolic contraction. It depends on preload, afterload and contractility. Preload refers to the amount of the myocardial fiber stretch present before each contraction. It represents the volume in the ventricle. Afterload reflects the amount of the resistance against which the ventricle is ejecting. And lastly, contractility is defined as the force generated by the myocardium which was independent of preload and afterload. So which are the factors determining cardiac output? As we have seen, it is preload, afterload, heart rate and also the rhythm of and myocardial contractility. Now what is low cardiac output syndrome? It is a clinical manifestation of mismatched oxygen delivery and oxygen consumption at the cellular level, which was driven by myocardial dysfunction and cardiovascular insufficiency, and it may lead to oxygen depth and organ dysfunction. It was first described by Pair and colleague in 1975 when they observed a cardiac index less than 2 liters per minute per meter square in about 25% of the patients after congenital heart surgery requiring cardiopulmonary bypass. A more recent study by Dew et al. Found a low cardiac output syndrome incidence of approximately 10%. Cardiopulmonary bypass related low cardiac output syndrome occurs around 6 to 8 hours after termination of cardiopulmonary bypass. Now coming to the pathophysiology and etiological factors. As we have seen, these are divided into the three parts: the preoperative status of the patient, perioperative factors and postoperative factors. I will see individual one by one. Low cardiac output syndrome is the result of multiple pathophysiological process and also multifactorial in etiology. Now what are the preoperative consideration? Some patients might have preoperative myocardial dysfunction, as we seen in the context of congestive heart failure, patient with chronic hypoxia and ventricular hypertrophy. Some of the patients might presented in the emergency with preoperative acidosis and in the shock state, like patients with obstructive lesions and repeated cyanotic spells. So if the patient are presented with this already pre-op myocardial dysfunction and pre-op acidosis and shock, this kind of patients are prone for development of low cardiac output syndrome in the post-operative period. Now coming to the perioperative factors. There are a lot of factors which contributes intraoperatively and may lead to the post-operative low cardiac output syndrome. It is divided into the cardiopulmonary bypass related factors and operative consideration. As we know, the cardiopulmonary bypass, it induces systemic inflammatory cytokine cascade which ultimately lead to hypermetabolic state and tissue supply and demand imbalance and ultimately myocardial dysfunction. CPB also induces cellular and mitochondrial dysfunction which ultimately lead to low cardiac output syndrome. There are so many factors that alter the cardiac loading conditions during cardiopulmonary bypass. There is increase in the pulmonary vascular resistance as well as systemic vascular resistance. Endothelial injury, decreased nitric oxide production, inflammation, positive pressure ventilation and sometimes chest closure. It may lead to increase in the pulmonary vascular resistance. Endothelial injury, decreased nitric oxide production, circulating catecholamines, renin-angiotensin system, and hypothermia and rewarming along with inflammation. It may lead to increase in the systemic vascular resistance, and there are sometimes hypovolemia because of bleeding, ultrafiltration, and capillary leak. Ultimately, these altered cardiac loading conditions may lead to the low cardiac output syndrome. In operative conditions, there is ischemia and reperfusion injury, aortic cross-clamp time, intraoperative hypotension, and inadequate cardioplegia. It may lead to the rhythm disturbance like AV block and junctional ectopic tachycardias, which lead to myocardial dysfunction. Some patients may require ventriculotomy. It may lead to edema or the tissue inflammation and sometimes rhythm disturbance also. And there is diastolic failure and myocardial dysfunction and ultimately low cardiac output syndrome. So these are the few perioperative factors that may lead to the development of low cardiac output syndrome. So coming to the post-operative factors, there are list of post-operative factors also lead to the low cardiac output syndrome. They independently or along with some intraoperative factors ultimately lead to low cardiac output syndrome. Hypothermia, electrolyte imbalance like hypocalcemia, hypoglycemia, hypo or hyperkalemia may lead to rhythm disturbance and cardiac dysfunction. Diastolic dysfunction, especially in the case of where there is a ventricular hypertrophy and along with ventriculotomy, there should be a right ventricular dysfunction and ultimately low cardiac output syndrome. Arrhythmias, post of arrhythmias incidence as high as 30%, and because of this tachyarrhythmia or bradyarrhythmia, there are chances that the patient might go into the low cardiac output syndrome. Some residual lesions also lead to low cardiac output syndrome post-operatively. Sometimes inadequate diagnosis, inadequate images, suboptimal operative decisions, it also lead to residual lesions. So one should have to check intraoperatively by transesophageal echocardiography about any residual lesions. Sometimes there are aortoventricular valve regurgitation or any outflow tract obstruction which lead to low cardiac output syndrome. And sometimes residual lesions with left to right shunt ultimately increase pulmonary blood flow, hypertensive crisis and lead to the low cardiac output syndrome. Pulmonary hypertensive crisis, it is an independent factor for development of low cardiac output syndrome in few patients. Pericardial tamponade, accumulation of blood or the fluid around the pericardium, it ultimately decreases venous return and ventricular filling and it lead to the pericardial low cardiac output syndrome. Coming to the monitoring and diagnosis, the key for preventing or mitigating low cardiac output syndrome is early recognition and timely intervention. Adequate monitoring implies a thorough initial and continuous assessment of the patient's hemodynamic status, response to the therapy, and evaluation of the changes noted in the physiological status. Both invasive and non-invasive monitoring strategies are available for early diagnosis of low cardiac output syndrome. So there are mainly clinical signs, hemodynamic parameters, and biochemical markers. In clinical signs, agitations, peripheries, skin, temperature gradient, and urine output. Hemodynamic parameters like ECG, rate and rhythm, invasive arterial blood pressure and trace, central venous pressure, and biochemical markers, acidosis, hyperkalemia, lactate levels, and mixed venous saturation. Coming to the assessment, now bedside assessment is very important. We have qualitative and quantitative assessment for the low cardiac output syndrome. Skin appearance. Skin appearance of the patient is cool, pale or mottled skin. Patients with low cardiac output syndrome have decreased level of consciousness or sometimes agitations. They have cold peripheries with absent dorsalis pedis pulse. The absent dorsalis pedis pulse is one of the bedside sign for low cardiac output syndrome. Temperature gradient. Temperature gradient from core to peripheries. Cold peripheries with increase in the core temperature. These all the symptoms are because of severe vasoconstriction due to shunting of the blood from peripheries to the vital organs. Now quantitative assessment. Capillary refill time. It is a valuable initial physiological parameter. Now, normal capillary refill time is less than 2 seconds. More than 3 seconds indicates volume depletion or hypotension. Urine output. It is a non-invasive method to measure the fluid balance. Normally, 1.5 to 2 ml per kg per hour urine output in infants and young children, and 1 ml per kg per hour in older children post-operatively. Now, urine output below these thresholds is a marker of reduced kidney perfusion. Pulse. Pulse provides rapid clues to the perfusion status. Rate. Rate vary depending upon the age of the infants and children. Rapid pulse is a non-specific clinical sign and often results from stress, agitation, fever, pain, hypovolemia, and due to cardiac impairment also. Bradycardia. It is a late sign for impending cardiac arrest. Now, the strength or the volume of the pulse. It related to the pulse pressure, defined as difference between the systolic and diastolic pressure. Narrow pulse pressure when cardiac output diminishes. Pulse was thready and difficult to feel. The strength should be assessed peripherally as well as centrally. A discrepancy between them may be an early sign of decreased cardiac output and diminished peripheral perfusion. This is the chart: pediatric respiratory and heart rate, lower limit, normal range, and upper limit by the age. So we should consider bradycardia or tachycardia depending upon the age of the patient. In ECG, sometimes you find junctional ectopic tachycardia. It is a serious and hemodynamically compromised tachyarrhythmia associated with pediatric cardiac surgery. Incidence is 5 to 6%. It occurs within 24 to 48 hours postoperatively. Causes significant compromise to cardiac output due to loss of AV synchrony and ventricular filling. Etiology might be injury to the conduction system, electrolyte imbalance, mainly hypomagnesemia, and maybe due to fever. Arterial blood pressure. So this is the waveform of the arterial blood pressure. As we are seeing the area under the curve, it equals to the systolic volume, and this is the most important part to diagnose hypovolemia. It's a normal or above normal in ventricular dysfunction due to severe vasoconstricted state. Now, waveform gives us the clue. As I told, area under the curve is directly related to the stroke volume. Low systolic pressure with high diastolic pressure, it's a sign of poor ventricular ejection and systemic vasoconstriction. Sometimes one find marked respiratory swing, that is stroke volume variation, it because of hypovolemia, maybe due to pericardial effusion and high intrathoracic pressure. Central venous pressure. It is an indicator of intravascular blood volume. Preload. Low CVP indicates inadequate preload, so one can give volume challenge. High CVP because of fluid overload or diminished RV systolic or diastolic function. In that case, one should have to restrict the fluid and give inotropic support. Mixed venous oxygen saturation. It reflects the amount of the oxygen left over or returned to the heart after tissue in the systemic circulation extracts what is needed. Normal value between 65 to 75%. Less than 65% indicates an increased oxygen extraction by the cells, suggestive of impaired tissue perfusion. Coming to arterial blood gas. It is a most valuable diagnostic tool that is used to determine acid-base balance and oxygenation in the clinical setting. It reveals the severity of the hypoxia and hypoperfusion, which is manifested by metabolic acidosis. Serum lactate levels. It is a marker for adequacy of tissue oxygenation, tissue delivery, and oxygen extraction. Normal values less than 2.5 millimole per liter. Lactate levels more than 4.5 millimole per liter on admission and increasing level in the serial measurement are most predictive of morbidity and mortality. That should be decreased within 60 minutes after initiating of any therapy aimed at the increasing perfusion. Arterial venous oxygen gradient. Difference between arterial oxygen saturation and mixed venous oxygen saturation. Represent the balance between the oxygen delivery and consumption. Normal arterial venous oxygen gradient, it should be less than 30%. High AVO2 with elevated serum lactate indicates an inability to consume oxygen at the cellular level. Hyperkalemia. An increase in the serum potassium trends associated with decreased urine output is suggestive of low cardiac output. More than 4.5 millimole per liter, it should be taken under consideration for its control management. Echocardiography. It is a very useful tool, intraoperative as well as postoperative. One should look for intraoperative transesophageal echocardiography, adequacy of dearing, adequacy of the repair, any residual defects or leaks, ventricular function, and degree of any shunting. In postoperative transthoracic echo, one should observe ventricular dysfunction and pericardial collection. Coming to the management part. So what are the goals for the management of low cardiac output syndrome? It is optimization of adequate preload, optimization of contact detail and ventricular function, improved diastolic dysfunction, and reduction of afterload. The fundamental principle of management is the maintenance of balance between oxygen delivery and demand. So prior to any management, one should have checklist about the adequacy of the airway, that is ET tube position, size and patency, ventilation, any atelectasis or pneumothorax, pericardial tamponade, pulmonary hypertensive crisis, arrhythmias, any residual lesions or any electrolyte abnormalities. So these are the management strategies for the treatment of low cardiac output syndrome. It's roughly divided into cardiac, pulmonary, neurohormonal and vascular. In cardiac, optimization of preload, ensure AV synchrony, increase heart rate, augment the contractility and improve ventricular relaxation. In pulmonary, decrease pulmonary vascular resistance, optimize mechanical ventilation and cardiopulmonary interactions. In neurohormonal, decrease the inflammation, restore the thyroid and the adrenal balance and ensure adequate sedation. Vascular, decrease systemic vascular resistance and increase the vascular tone if vasoplasia. These are the interventions that focus on minimizing the oxygen consumption by decreasing metabolic rate and demands include following: maintaining normohypothermia or mild hypothermia, appropriate analgesia and sedation, initiating mechanical ventilation to decrease the work of breathing, preventing or treating tachyarrhythmia promptly, external or epicardial pacing to attain an adequate heart rate. Management of junctional ectopic tachycardia, it includes adequate analgesia and sedation, modest hypothermia, correction of electrolytes, optimal doses of adrenergic drugs, IV amiodarone, IV magnesium, overdrive pacing to restore the AV synchrony and use of ivabradine. Optimization of preload. Inadequate ventricular preload is common post-operatively as a result of hypovolemia, which is secondary to blood loss and perioperative fluid shift. Now children with hypertrophied ventricles, they also require higher than the normal filling pressures. Optimizing preload with fluid challenge, utilizing the Frank-Starling mechanism to improve stroke volume and cardiac output. How will you assess? So assessment is done with a prompt decrease in heart rate, improving arterial blood pressure, increase in the venous oxygen saturation and decreasing the lactate levels. After volume challenge, if there is a lack of response, so it's suggestive of preload reserve is exhausted and inotroph or afterload reduction should be tried. Improvement of systolic function. Catecholamines are the mainstay of inotropic support. Adrenaline and dopamine, they are the most common agents in this class, are used to prevent or treat the low cardiac output syndrome. However, the frequency of use of these inotropes has decreased in the past few years because of better understanding of low cardiac output syndrome, more emphasis on reducing RV and LV afterload. Calcium ion is an essential for myofibril contraction and adequate level of calcium should be maintained. Intravenous calcium administration, it increases the contractility and increase smooth muscle tone. Inodilators. Inodilators have inotropic and lucitropic effects on the myocardium and vasodilatory effect on systemic, pulmonary and coronary vasculature. Milrinone has been widely used agent to prevent or treat low cardiac output syndrome in children. Another systemic vasodilators that have been tried are sodium nitroprusside, nitroglycerin, nicardipine and phenoxybenzamine. Vasopressors. What is vasomotor paresis? It is a pathological decrease in the vascular tone which increase venous capacitance and decrease the systemic vascular resistance. Vasopressin has been used in children with refractory hypotension and vasoplasia after cardiac surgery. It causes peripheral vasoconstriction, increasing SVR and arterial blood pressure. Studies have shown to decrease the need of the fluid resuscitation and inotropic support with the use of vasopressin. Positive pressure ventilation. Positive pressure ventilation increases the intrathoracic pressure, and by doing so, it decreases the systemic ventricular afterload, which is beneficial to the patient with impaired systolic function. And by mechanically unloading the respiratory pumps, the respirator muscle perfusion requirements also decrease and limited cardiac output is redistributed to the vital organs. Mechanical circulatory support. Once the residual defect have been ruled out and inadequate cardiac output persists, despite the maximal medical therapy, extracorporeal life support should be considered. The timing of extracorporeal life support initiation is a key determinant of the outcome. This is the picture showing the cyclist, and we compare this picture with the determinants of cardiac output. If the cyclist want to win the race, he has to pedal more. Same way, heart rate. We have to control the heart rate for optimal cardiac output. Contractility. Here the cyclist have to push harder. He has to use his muscle tone to increase the pedaling rate. So same way we have to increase the contractility to increase the cardiac output. Here the preload is suggestive of wind. If there is a wind that push the cyclist to move forward, same way we have to optimize the preload for the optimal cardiac output. And here we have seen the bumps in the roads, each which we compare with the afterload. If it is a smooth, then the cyclist can go further and win the race. Same way, if you reduce the afterload, the contractility will be improve itself. Now take home message. The low cardiac output is an umbrella term encompassing the set of the condition leading to an imbalance of oxygen supply and demand. Establishment of clinical diagnosis require a thorough and vigilant assessment of hemodynamic, electrophysiological and laboratory variables. The management of low cardiac output syndrome is evolving and new therapies continuing to emerge with the ongoing research. There is insufficient evidence to support a single agent as the universal base therapy for prevention or treatment of low cardiac output syndrome. Thank you.